Hi, my name is Michael de Podesta. This is me. And last night I gave a talk to the Richmond and Twickenham Friends of the Earth about how to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from what I've done to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from my home. And I'm just going to run through those slides now. It's probably about half an hour or something like that. Okay, let's begin. So what I'm going to talk about is in 8 sections. Most of them are just 1 or 2 slides long. Most of what we're going to talk about is this one, where I just tell you what I've done. But first, just to look at the motivation for why it matters. It's really easy to just forget this. But so this is a graph which shows goes from 1860 up to 2100. So obviously we're here at 2020 now. And it shows the change in the temperature of the land surface averaged over the United Kingdom. So if we plot that up here, you can see that the UK climate, not just the global climate, the UK climate has warmed. But we have options coming up here. Now, what does that mean? So here's my life. This is how much the temperature of the UK has changed in my lifetime. I'm planning to die in 2040. My children, if they live to 80, they'll experience, well, what will they experience? If we act now, they can experience something not very different from what we've got now. But if we don't, they can experience something really, really terrible. And that's why it matters. The awful truth is that the climate that I grew up in, the climate probably that you grew up in, is gone. It's gone forever. But that if we try very hard right now, not tomorrow, now, we can still make things acceptable. We just need to stop emitting carbon dioxide. So if this is so important, why haven't we done it already? Well, you can see just with this little picture here, it shows a Le Creuset pot. My God, that's so expensive. And this picture of it being warmed by a gas fire is very, it conjures in my mind images of home and warmth and good food. And so when we look at why we haven't done it already, it's because emitting CO2 is easy. It's associated with lots of good things. We get good feelings about heating our homes, cooking, driving, flying to go on holidays, using the electrical items. All these things cause carbon dioxide emissions, and we've all got very good associations with all of them in general. Driving, perhaps one on the border there, but it brings people who have cars because they want them. They enable their lifestyles. And the second thing is that CO2 is invisible. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you don't hear it. Often the emissions are remote, although that's not true for gas in our homes. And their effect is slow, so it's very hard to really appreciate that you have emitted anything at all. There's no big sign saying you just emitted X kilograms of carbon dioxide. So understanding it is not just an emotional challenge, it's an intellectual challenge to understand that that thing really happened. Carbon dioxide was really emitted. And the last thing is that everybody is doing it. It's like the film Don't Look Up. People just don't want to acknowledge the real difficulty of the situation that we're actually in. And so for all these reasons, so if you want to challenge it, for example, the status quo feels familiar, and being the first to do something in your group can feel very hard, and doing anything costs money. So it's easy to just avoid doing it. So for all these reasons, stopping emitting carbon dioxide is very hard. But this is why it matters. So for me, there is no amount of money that I could give to my children, that would make up for damage I've caused to the world that they've got to live in. It feels viscerally awful to hand over money to my children instead of working on my house and making the climate better. So I'm sorry about your inheritance, boys. So how much CO2 do I emit? Because we don't get a sort of report on it. It's not easy to assess. So there are lots of ways that I emit CO2. The first is I have a pension, and that's invested in companies that do things that emit CO2. I don't know how much CO2 they emit, but I suspect it's a lot. I consume things. So I've calculated from my food, I produce about, associated with the production of the food that I eat, is about a ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent gases. And I'm working on this. If you notice, I'm drinking my tea here. It's got no milk in. So I'm doing that because the pleasure I get from drinking tea with milk, I am a really, I drink tea all the time. I've drunk tea with milk since it was first served to me when I was, I don't know, 5 years old or something. But I've given it up. But doing this sort of stuff, it's relatively small amounts of carbon dioxide, relatively small, and also very, very hard personally. Traveling, my wife and I, we emit about 0.8 tons from driving our car, about 5,000 miles a year. And well, none of us have been doing much flying lately, but I used to fly for work a lot. But what I want to talk about today is that back in 2019, this house emitted 3 tons of carbon dioxide from heating it, and 0.8 tons from the electricity it used. And so that is the topic of this talk. That's what I want to talk about. All these things are all very important, but we've got to focus. So how do I work out how much carbon dioxide is emitted from gas used in my house? So what I do is I look at the meter, and your meter may read in hundreds of cubic feet or in cubic meters. And so what we need to do is convert these metering units into energy units, and then the energy units into mass of carbon dioxide. So what you do is whatever readings you have from your meter here, you multiply by 31.7 if it's in hundreds of cubic feet to get kilowatt hours, the unit of energy in the gas. And if you read in cubic meters, you multiply by 11.2 to get the number of kilowatt hours. And then whatever this number is, you multiply again by 0.2 to get the number of kilograms of CO2. Now, there is argument about exactly what that number is, but please, let's not discuss that now. Let's take this as a useful figure. And then what you do is you read the meter once a week, which I'll show you what I've been doing for a while. And from that, by subtracting 1 week from the next, you can work out how much you consumed on average per day during that week. And you can work out the amount of carbon dioxide that was emitted. So this is what the graph looks like for gas use. So this is going from, this is 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. And this is the cumulative use of gas. So you can see in the winter here we were using 80 kilowatt hours a day. Then in the summer we don't use very much. And then here it was 70 kilowatt hours a day. And then here it was 39 kilowatt hours a day. And this winter, it's almost nothing. Yay! Fantastic. But we can multiply these numbers now, which are very big. These are like 10,000, 20,000 kilowatt hours. We can multiply these numbers by 0.2 to get the mass. And this is where the real astonishing fact comes out, that back then the house emitted 3 tons of carbon dioxide. So that's 3 tons of something leaving the flue of my house. I had no consciousness of just how big that number was. It's more than all the waste we put out in a year. 3 tons of carbon dioxide emitted. Absolutely breathtaking. The next year, through various projects, we managed to get it down to 2.6. The following year, we got it down to 1.3, and this year it will be almost nothing. Next year, it will be nothing. This is just from cooking with gas. So from electricity, we do the same kind of thing. You read the meter, but the meter's reading kilowatt hours now, so that the metering units are the same as the energy units. So that's easy. But to find out how many kilograms of carbon dioxide are emitted is a little bit difficult, because it varies hour by hour through the day, depending on how much renewable energy is contributing to our UK requirements. So this figure, 0.24 kilograms per kilowatt hour, that was the average figure for 2021. This year, hopefully there's a few more renewables, it'll go down a bit. Previous years, it's been higher. So I'm going to use this figure to talk about things. So I read the meter once a week, make a spreadsheet, and then I can look at the total electricity use and the total CO2 emitted. And it looks rather different from the other graphs. So again, this is 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. And you can see that it's a pretty steady slope going through here of about 10 kilowatt hours a day. And then in March last year, we apparently stopped using any electricity. So this was when we had a battery installed that allowed us to use our solar energy very efficiently. And you can see it, but now in winter it's got very steep. This is because we're now heating the house with a heat pump that uses electricity. But you can see that roughly over a year, and we're only here at the moment, so I don't quite know where this graph will go, but it will very roughly meet with what it was with this trend here, which tells me that roughly speaking, the electricity use is going to be about the same as it was, except that now we don't have any gas consumption. Okay, so and then converting that to carbon dioxide, again, it's the same looking graph, but the numbers are slightly smaller now. It's about 0.8 tons, about 0.7 tons, and about 0.6 tons. Those are very rough numbers. And so the gist of what I've done is to go from emitting 3.7 tons of carbon dioxide a year to about 0.7 tons. Now, again, there's some uncertainty in these, but the big scale, this is an 80% reduction, and there has been absolutely no loss in the quality of life in this household. Okay, so what did I do? Let me tell you the story. The plan had three parts. The first is to reduce heat losses in the house, so as to reduce the amount of heating we needed at all. The next was to generate renewable electricity. And then the last was to stop burning gas and use a heat pump. So let's look at reducing heat losses. So triple glazing is just like double glazing. And I'll just show you some pictures of it, but there's not much to say about it. But external wall insulation is often quite unfamiliar. So let me tell you about the process. You take your wall and you put some primer on the outside of it, and then you install a little rail along the bottom here, and you start to put on insulation boards, and you put them on with blobs of adhesive mortar, and that like that, and then you fill in any gaps with foam to make sure it's really airtight, and then you secure that to the wall with mechanical fixings. Then you cover it with various layers of mortar, and with embedded in it fiberglass mesh that stops it cracking as the temperatures change, and then you put on a decorative color. So this is the house undergoing its retrofit. You can see this is the mortar here. We had a chimney breast removed. The pink stuff is the insulating boards, and you can see here they're doing work around where we've got an outside tap, and they have to move the tap outwards so it comes beyond the insulating boards. We put a new roof on top here because the old roof was rubbish. Again, so this is now very well insulated. you can see the tap here is now poked through the insulating board, and here you can see the mechanical fixings. This bit hasn't been done yet, and here you can see some of the first layer of the mortar. So that's just detail of the mechanical fixings and the insulating foam. So the reason in our house, I thought that 100 millimeters of insulation would be enough that we could get good results, but it wouldn't be too visually offensive. So when you see the pictures, I hope you'll agree, but going down the street, I wanted the house not to look extraordinary. I wanted it just to look ordinary. And that was the plan. So this is what it looks like now. We had a tasteful yellow. I wanted the next shade up. My wife wanted, well, she wanted it white really, but I think this is nice. And again, this is not too visually offensive. That's a sort of wider view. And this is the front of the house, so you can see it has details like these are pretend bricks that are put on to match details in neighbouring houses. We could have had the whole thing covered in these. In fact, that was the plan at first, but we just thought it wouldn't look very nice. And again, you can see all the drain pipes have been moved out. If you look in detail here, you could, so this is the triple glazing, looks just like double glazing, but it's a bit better. Okay, so what was the effect of that, the triple glazing? It's to take this figure here, this 2.6 tons, and to reduce it to this. So basically doing that, halve the amount of heat we need to put into the house to keep the temperature the same. So we then generated renewable electricity. So that is here. So that's the roof beforehand, and that's the roof. We've got 6 panels here and 6 panels on the side here. And each panel generally produces about 40 volts, something like that, and they're added together in series to give roughly 240 volts, and then a device called an inverter turns it into mains electricity that feeds the house. The orientation is important, so we thought we would have to put everything on this basically south facing roof, but in fact that is not true at all. West facing and even east facing roofs are fine, so our panels are oriented like that. And being on this roof means that in the summer, when the sun sets up here, we generate quite late into the day. We also added a battery. This is the Tesla Powerwall. It has 13.5 kilowatt hours of storage. If you remember, on average, we used about 10 kilowatt hours a day of electricity. And so this sits here and it takes in the solar generation. It's connected to the grid and connected to the home. And so if it can, it will operate the house from the solar generation. If it can't, it'll use its own internal resources. And then if it's run out of gas, run out of battery, it will take energy from the grid. And similarly, in the summer, when there's a lot of solar around, it'll first run the home from it, and then if there's extra, it'll charge itself up, and when it's charged, it'll then export to the grid, and it does all that seamlessly. So this is a winter's day for a battery. So you can see here's the household demand. These are kilowatts up here, and this is 24 hours of the day. So you can see the demand is roughly a kilowatt or something like that. Most of that is the heat pump, so probably 600 or 700 watts of that is the heat pump. You can see it cycling on and off here, and these are kettles or microwaves or something. This is the heat pump heating the hot water at night. There was a little bit of solar on this day, 27th of January, just a couple of weeks ago, and you can see that as you look at what the battery was doing. So here the battery is drawing energy from the grid and charging up, and then this is cheap rate electricity, which is just 5 pence a unit, and then we operate from the battery through the day. The battery actually recharges a little bit when the solar comes on, and then in the evening we run through the battery again, and then about 11 o'clock the battery ran out and we had to actually buy some electricity. So if you look at the mains, we drew electricity from the mains during those hours for the cheap rate electricity, and this we had to actually buy full price electricity. In an autumn day or a summer day, it's different. So there's no heating, so you can see this general level of use is much lower. It's 200 to 300 watts. Again, kettles and microwaves and things. Here's the solar panels. They generated 6.6 units that day. It's quite a lot. And you can see that we're operating off the battery here. And as we come down here, it begins to charge the battery. So we're operating on solar and charging the battery again. And then we operate on the battery all evening. So that when you look at how much electricity was drawn from the grid, there's none. I can't tell you how fantastic that feeling is. Not drawing electricity from the grid. It is like floating, living on the sunshine. It feels remarkable. So that's what happened here. So over the central months of the year, we have very low grid use, which obviously costs nothing. And then in the winter months, where we're using the heat pump, we're mainly using cheap electricity. So we, on average, we're paying about 6 pence a unit or something like that. And then finally, we stopped burning gas. Okay, so you can see the heat pump here, just tucked in down the side of the house. There it is. So what is a heat pump? It's a device that extracts heat from the air. So for every unit of electricity that you use to operate the device, it sucks between 3 and 4 units of heat out of the air. So with 1 unit of electricity, you can get 4 units of heating. Absolutely remarkable engineering. And what it does is it replaces the gas boiler. So you put electricity into it, and then it has 2 pipes, cold water in and hot water out. And so it switches between 2 modes. In one mode, it outputs hot water into a hot water cylinder and for use around the house. And in the other mode, it puts water around the radiators, and it adjusts the water temperature in the radiators to keep the temperature in the house constant. So this is a complicated graph. So let me show you here. This is the 27th of November 2021, and this is the end of it is the 27th of January 2022. So it's 2 months through the winter. And so the first thing to look at here is some temperatures. This is the temperature in the middle room in our house. And you can see it's 20 degrees. It doesn't vary by more than half a degree from 20 degrees, not even for a minute through the entire 2 months. So you can see this is the outside temperature, and you see here the temperature goes really low. It's below 0 here, below 0 here, below 0 here. And then you can see the green one shows the temperature of the water in the radiators. So you can see that when the outside temperature goes low, the temperature of the water in the radiators goes high to put more heat into the house. And then when it's warm outside, we had some very mild weather here, over 10 degrees, you can see the temperature in the radiators down to 30 degrees. So it's warming the house with very, very lightly warmed water. 30 degrees doesn't feel like a hot radiator at all. 40 degrees feels just like warm, yeah. And so you can see that whole process going on, sort of like a mirror. When it gets cold outside, the flow temperature goes up, but the temperature in the house stays constant. And this is the electrical energy that achieved that. So these spikes along here, there are the overnight heating of hot water for the house. You can see so the scale here is that's 1 kilowatt along here. So you can see that if you average that, the average is half a kilowatt or something like that. So half a bar fire has heated this 164 square meters of house for 2 months. It's a tiny amount of electricity. Of course, it produces more heat than that. It produces half a kilowatt produces about four times that amount, 2 kilowatts of heating power in the house. So that's what we've done to the house to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, as I explained here. So in the next sections, I'm going to talk about what it all cost, just a summary of it, and things that you might like to think of doing, and address some of the questions. So let's look at how much it all cost. So these are the main works, and these are other things that we had done that you might include in it, or you might count separately. They'd be different in each different house. So the triple glazing, we had them done in 2 batches, but it came to 11 windows and 2 doors, and it came to £10,280. The things I'd say about that is to avoid any of the big companies, Everest or Anglian, because they just operate with salespeople, and it's they try to induce stress and try to make you sign up. It's in a really despicable way. So we used a local company. So all the local companies all around the country, and their business is not making windows. There are 3 or 4 factories in the UK that make excellent double glazed units. And what the local companies do is they're fitters, and what they will do is they will measure your windows, and they'll get the right size, and so they'll come and measure your windows, send them out, take 2 or 3 weeks to be manufactured, and they come back and they'll fit them. I think it's remarkable value. All windows need replacing eventually. They last 25, 30, 40, 50 years, but replacing them is just what happens in a house. So it's this made about 10% reduction in the heating requirements. The external wall insulation made the biggest difference. Very expensive. So the guide price is £100 per square meter of wall that you want insulated, £100 plus VAT. We paid a bit more than that, bit over the odds for that, because we had the extra work done on the roof of the extension. It's a new roof. We had other work done on the guttering and the soffit boards at the top of the insulation, and had to have some repairs done to the existing rendering. The solar panels, absolute bargain, £4,200. Now, we had scaffolding up at the time they were installed, but you'd have to pay for scaffolding. And that's a standard 4 kilowatt peak system, so you don't need any network permission to install that. Anyone can install that. The battery, we could have got it a bit cheaper than this. That's £10,500. But I liked the company. I thought they operated well. It's the Little Green Electricity Company. Basically, they answered the phone when I called up, and the other company didn't. And then finally, we had the heat pump installed. That was done by a company called Inhabit, and they charged us £8,036. Actually, they charged us £13,036, but the government had a scheme for supporting this work and gave £5,000 to Inhabit on our behalf. We had to have extra wiring done in the house to achieve that, to get the installation installed. We had to have an EPC rating done that cost £90 and was substantially a waste of money, but there you go. We put monitoring in, so those graphs are showing you all the temperatures. That's from a monitoring system, so it's part of a system for the government where they paid me to install it. In fact, no, I installed it and they pay me back now over, I think, 7 years. We also had air conditioning installed, which is a complete luxury, but when you look at the graph, it's clear that those blistering summer heats, which perhaps only a week or two of temperatures above 30 Celsius, they are likely to become more common, and I can't bear them. I just can't bear that weather. And so this is a very small system, but it just cools the house down. It mainly cools our bedroom and just puts a little bit of cooling into the hallway. And then we had to have the bathroom refurbished because we didn't have a domestic hot water cylinder. So when we put one in, we had to move everything around in the bathroom. So this is, all the figures are based on the same price for electricity, which is obviously going to be changing and going up. These were the rates at the time. So before, we had a standing charge. There's nothing we can do about that. But gas was 3.5 pence a unit, and the electricity was 25 pence a unit. And we used about 3,800 units in a year, and came to £1,650. Afterwards, we used very, very little gas, and the electricity is around about the same as it was, except that in the summer, so that's the electricity we use, but in the summer we don't buy it, we just get it off the roof. And then in the winter we buy cheap rate electricity and use it during the day. So the cost of it is dramatically reduced, and you can see that actually a full quarter of our costs are the standing charge. And also the part of the Renewable Heat Initiative, the government subsidise the bill anyway, and the subsidy comes to the bill. So I'm embarrassed about that. So what is the return on investment? So roughly speaking, expending £60,000, I'm saving £1,000 a year, which is 1.6%. Now you may consider that a lot or a little. But I am saving about 3 tons of carbon dioxide a year. So that's on this graph. This is showing the years 2020. This is my expected date of death in 2040. And you can see that the red line here shows how much carbon dioxide we would have emitted if we just kept doing exactly what we had been doing. And the green line shows what we've done. So you can see that it actually goes up steeper. That's because there's embodied carbon dioxide used to make the steel for all the frame of the heat pump, the aluminium and silicon in the solar panels, the mortar and the plastic in the foam boards and so on. And so that came to about 11 tons. So actually our emissions actually went up that year. But you can see that now we're on the slope here, and at the end of 2022, which is here, this is the end of 22, we should be about break even. And then by the age of my death, we should have saved 60 tons of carbon dioxide that will just not be emitted, but our quality of life won't have changed. So here's the summary of what I've done. We've gone from 3.8 tons to about 0.7 tons with no loss of quality of life, except I just don't have £60,000. This was my pension lump sum, and well, it's worth it or it's not. So that was what I've done here, 80% reduction with no loss of quality of life. So with these other categories, these all require very difficult choices and changes of habits that many people would regard as a loss of quality of life. So I'm not going to talk about these because that's something for another day, but that's just want to show you this, to show you it in the context of all the things, the ways we emit carbon dioxide. So what can you do? So first of all, it may be that you can't do anything. Most people are just struggling to pay the bill at the minute. And if you're in that category, please don't beat yourself up. it's really the government's responsibility. It shouldn't really be forced onto individuals to make these decisions. But there are three suggestions. The first is just to find out how much heating your dwelling uses, and is it a lot or a little. So anyone can do that. The second is, if you have the chance, to prepare for a heat pump. If your boiler breaks and you need heating, often you just replace the boiler because it's the simplest thing to do, it's cheapest, and you can do it most quickly. But if you plan for that, you can perhaps proactively get a heat pump. And then if you have the means, to think about solar panels and a battery, or you can buy a fraction of a wind turbine through this company Ripple, who have just bought a wind turbine collectively and just installing it right now, and they'll buy another one. You're not allowed to buy a big amount of it. You just buy, I don't know what it is, a few percent, 1% of a wind turbine or something. So is it a lot or a little? So when we started, my house used 15,000 kilowatt hours a year of gas, pretty much all for heating. My house floor area is 164 square meters, so that's 91 kilowatt hours per square meter. And after the improvements, it went to 49. Now, if you look at this chart, this is my house before, this is my house after. Now, the best possible retrofit you can get is called Enerfit, and that's about 25 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. And to do that, I would probably have to insulate under the floor of my house, and then to reduce the airflow through it. Both quite big tasks, and I'm not going to do them right now. And then if you build from scratch a passive house, you'll have 15. Many UK houses are over here somewhere. They're over 100 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. And if you're in that category, think about some kind of insulation. So the second one is prepare for a heat pump, and one of the ways to do that is to turn down the temperature of the water in the radiators in your home. So gas boilers are very powerful. 20-30 kilowatts is not uncommon, but most homes only require 5 to 10 kilowatts. So what happens is the boiler puts hot water through the radiators. They get very hot, they warm up your home, and then they switch off. And this is actually very bad for the boiler. These very high temperatures make it operate inefficiently. But what you can do is most boilers have a knob so you can turn down the temperature in the radiators. And what happens then is you still get the same temperature, except it uses cooler water, and that makes the boiler operate more efficiently, and you get more heat out for a given use of gas. And if you can get your boiler temperature, so ideally you get the boiler temperature so that it's on all the time, and then it's operating at the lowest possible temperature. So this would be the most efficient. So if you can get your boiler, the temperature of the water in the radiators down to about 50 degrees, then you'll have no problem putting in a heat pump and using your existing radiators. And the last thing is to think about solar panels. Again, if you've got the money, it's a great thing to do. I'm really disappointed looking around Teddington, which is a reasonably affluent place. Very few people have solar panels. I just don't know why. It's the solar photovoltaic are probably what I would recommend you look at. And if you can afford a battery, it's, of all the things I bought, this has brought the biggest obvious cash benefit to me personally. So this represents a return of 7 or 8%, I think, if I remember correctly, on the cost. So questions. So these are some of the questions I anticipated, and most of these came up. So last night. So heat pumps, are they noisy? No, they're not noisy. It's just not true. There are many different brands. They have different refrigerants. I picked one that has a refrigerant with a very low global warming potential. It's not a very significant thing, but I just liked the fact that it was there. So if you can't fit a domestic hot water cylinder in your house, there are new things called thermal stores that have a chemical in that melts when you heat it up above about 55 degrees. And what you do is you heat it up with solar power or with a heat pump or something, and melt it, and that's like storing heat in it. And when you want to get hot water, you run cold water in, and the cold water runs through this material and heats up, so you have instant hot water, and you don't have a store of actual hot water. So the nice thing about this is it's very space efficient. The boxes are cubical, so they actually fit in cupboards and in places that cylinders don't. And they have about twice the energy storage density of a domestic hot water cylinder. External wall insulation, fire risk. Well, if you look at my blog, I've done work on the fire risk. I think the fire risk is practically zero. Not true for high rises, but certainly true for normal houses. And putting external wall insulation, there's very little risk of damp, because basically you're warming up the entire house. All the brickwork becomes warmer, and the chance of condensation in it becomes less. Triple glazing, go for argon. These things don't pay back the carbon very well. Solar panels, there are lots of choices about this, but there are just so many good things out there, and they are so cheap. So I used panels from Q-Cells. They are excellent so far, but I'm sure there are many other excellent products out there. A battery is very expensive, but I expect that the cost will come down in future years. And my battery is guaranteed to have 80% of its capacity after 10 years. I'm hoping it will be better than that, but it does have a very difficult job. It loads up and completely empties, which is a very stressful thing for a battery to do. So the embodied carbon, I talked about that previously. It came to about 11 tons for these works, so it takes about 3 years to repay. Green electricity tariffs, I've written about that on my blog. They are not green. So you can buy electricity from Dale Vince, but if it comes out of the grid, carbon dioxide is being emitted in order to enable that electricity to reach you. If you took out all the carbon emitting electricity sources, the gas power stations, the coal-fired power stations, the grid wouldn't work. It would just stop working. So there's no way to get just renewable electricity into your house aside from putting it on your roof. Hydrogen, it will never happen. Absolutely terrible idea. It's got great applications in industry as ways of decarbonizing, but in a domestic setting for heating or for cars, it's just a dead end. And finally, electric vehicles. If you drive quite a lot, it makes sense to get one. Certainly in terms of carbon emissions, it's dramatically better. But when you do, remember to have your old petrol car scrapped. Don't put it out there to become cheap carbon emitter for somebody else. Okay, so that's the end of the talk. I hope I've covered most things. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you.